Welcome back. So, hold on, get up here, buddy. Okay. All right. Except now we can see up the hill and see the fox. But anyway, okay. So, meditations from last week. I don't know if Lynn's has had a chance to catch up, but we did meditations 1 through 6 from the Yogic Insight. So the Advaita Vedanta kind of like, who am I stuff. So, I don't know, what'd you think? Or actually, I'm kind of more interested in what you felt, what you thought.
I guess, I felt from time to time as we've gone through this course that I'm kind of maybe not quite at the same level as everybody else, but I still feel like I'm getting a lot out of it. So one thing I've noticed is I'm almost caught up with the meditations I've done 1 through 5. And I've been sleeping really, really well. And I've been remembering my dreams every night, which is very unusual. Usually I'll remember like maybe 5 dreams a year or something. And I've remembered 5 dreams in the last 5 days. So it's, there's something going on.
That's really interesting. So that is a sort of waking up. And that's it's a funny thing. So there's a lot of very specific practices that are done to first remember dreams and then become conscious in dreams and then become conscious in deep sleep. And they're usually explicit in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, not so much the yogis. But Rupert Spira, who these meditations came from, I've heard him talk just about, he sort of lies down and stays conscious all night and gets up through the next day. And that's not, I don't think, from specific practices, but just from practicing. So that it is an interesting sign of your consciousness sort of increasing.
Yeah, I can, it's a huge difference. I mean, I can say that. And just all remembering all the details, and it's very fascinating. And I feel, the other thing I guess is just, I feel good. I feel when I do the meditations, I feel very peaceful, which
Yeah. And in terms of like being where everyone else is, yes, the other two have done, Jeff's done some of the meditations and Lindsay's done them before, but that's it. I mean, having done them or not isn't really a big difference in experience. I wouldn't say that they're somewhere other than you are. Actually, this is a very sort of well-matched group. So whether or not you've engaged in these specific practices before isn't the same as being ready for them and open to whatever they.
Yes, one thought. Well, many times, Karen, I understand things when you're talking about them, but when I read things, it doesn't connect with me as well, I think. And so the reading that you sent out, I've read it several times, and it's kind of just, I'm not sure what's talking about.
Yes, and no problem at all on that. That was mostly the reason, and I have another one I'm going to send, but again, don't even read it. The reason, those are, I think what's great about you, Robin, is you don't have set ideas about this topic. And the reason I send those articles is they're sent to counteract set ideas that sometimes people come in with. So I've had people come into courses, mostly people who have been teaching a long time, read some books, saw some stuff on social media, and they have this idea that they have to kill their ego. And then they'll be happy. So that's why I sent the article, is in case someone had that thought. You don't have that thought, so you don't need the article. But once someone has that idea, it's actually very, very hard to change, to soften or change that attitude. And it's kind of like hating your body. Buddy. This is the 9 o'clock. Neighbor walking the dog to heaven.
My cat is disturbed.
I'm disturbed too.
You can see that.
They're gonna stop and then they'll do it again when this dog comes down the hills. It's a timing issue. Yeah, and in terms of, in terms of reading about this stuff in general, it's so hard to put into words. And it's so easy to get off on philosophical tangents that sort of sound nice. And then all of a sudden you're like, I don't even know, what are they even saying? So I'm going to try to keep it like down to earth. And hopefully that will then make it not feel weird. Because I think this stuff's super practical, super natural, super real. But it usually, hold on. I thought I had it with the daddy voice. Get up here. Trying to keep it real, trying to keep it applicable, because this stuff should be helpful. These aren't the ultimate teachings in terms of being weird. They should be the ultimate teachings in like understanding yourself. So, anyway, I'll try, but to also know that, reading this stuff is really hard. Buddy. Jeff, what were you going to say?
Let me think. Oh, crap. Oh, so yeah, so Robin was talking about like the experience, like having, less experience. And I feel like I don't have much experience either. What I can say is that I did these meditations kind of on my own, almost about 2/3 of them a couple of months ago. And just starting them again this week, the first couple of days, I would say the first like 3 or 4 meditations, I was kind of like, nothing's really happening. And I couldn't really get like behind the curtain, so to speak. But then I always felt good afterwards. I always felt like, I always felt good. And I also started yoga again this week after, recovering from being sick. And about the second or third day of doing the more active yoga, the more vinyasa type yoga, I started concentrating more in the yoga, and started to be a little bit more present, and also because I get this whole like energy body type thing when I'm doing these insight meditations, and started to think about that in terms of the asana. More of like, the drawings, like Susan's drawings and stuff like that, more thinking about like that, like kind of the energy body and stuff like that. And it just kind of like happened. I didn't really think about it like too much. It just kind of, I started, just feeling it a little bit more. And then in Friday and yesterday in the 2 meditations, I actually had pretty stronger reactions to the meditations without thinking about it, without trying. So I think it just, some days you see behind that curtain for 20 of the 30 minutes, and other days you may just look behind it for like a minute during the meditation or something. So it's just, and I don't think it has anything to do with how much experience you have.
No. And what's so perfect about what Jeff just said, and something that we all just, as those of you who are teachers and practitioners, Jeff had a really strong intuitive reaction, energetic reaction the first time he did these. So I would have bet money that he didn't the second time. And I was waiting to hear that, because that's the thing about like super deep opening experiences is like, once you have them, then you sort of expect them, and it's impossible to have one when you're expecting them, because you're not relaxing in the same way, because you're looking for something. And however subtle that looking is, there's nothing wrong with it. Hey, buddy, lie down, okay? However subtle the looking, it's the letting go. It's the letting go that causes the opening. So, and just knowing that. So even like, let's say you go to a meditation retreat and you're doing 6-8 sessions a day. And I'm sorry about that, dogs. You're doing 6-8 sessions a day for 15 days or something. I guarantee you, no matter how I had them quiet too. It's just impossible to not have a little expectation about, oh, this session will probably be a lot like the last session. Oh, I'm getting more concentrated. Then you have like a totally unconcentrated session. Oh, I'm getting more peaceful. And then you have one that's not. So, and I don't think there's any way to avoid that. It's just a part of practice. And then I think, that really can be extrapolated out to life, right? You're like, gosh, I've been feeling so, name it, peaceful, stressed, healthy, unhealthy, whatever. I guarantee you the next day we'll have some different variation, because that's just kind of how we're made. Nothing really stays steady. And these are these deep teachings of Buddhism and of course yoga of impermanence. It really starts to get you when you realize, gosh, I can't maintain really anything, even when I know what I'm doing and I have a sense of what I'm doing. And, here I am preparing myself. And then, and that's, some teachers talk about an element of grace. Krishna Das likes to say, anytime you get it, there's this element of grace from outside. And that's, one way to think of it. And another way to think of it is just, we're going to be all over the place. And sometimes you're going to have insights and sometimes you're going to have nothing.
I mean, I think part of it for me, it's important. I've got brain fog today. When I feel like when I'm doing these longer meditations, especially like the 30-minute meditations and nothing's happening, or I feel like nothing's happening, of course stuff is happening. For me not to be like, oh, nothing's happening, so I'm either doing it wrong or just to get rid of the whole judgment and all that stuff. And then because I always feel like afterwards, I always feel good, even if I felt like nothing happened. I always feel like, and then during the meditation, if I'm in the middle of it and I'm nothing's happening, so okay, whatever, then usually something starts to happen.
Because you
yeah.
And it's so interesting, both Jeff and Lindsay Rubin have done meditation teacher training. So I want to speak to them, as teachers as well as students. And, when you're guiding a 15-minute mindfulness, your students are having the same experience you just talked about. They're going through it and they're at minute 7 and they're like, nothing's happening. I'm just sitting here thinking, and they'll either keep pushing against it, or sometimes maybe you can say the right words and guidance and they just let go of trying too hard and expecting something specific. And then they actually get some kind of pleasant outcome. But the bottom line is you do feel better at the end, regardless of how it went and how successful it was. And also you're planting seeds every time you do it. And that's why, I've had some health stuff over the last few years, but especially the last month. And when I sit down, I'm like, I don't know, I'm mostly planning stuff or trying to sort stuff out. But I still do it because I still think my nervous system will benefit just sitting still for 15 minutes in the position that we know creates physiologically alertness and relaxation. And I don't even give myself a hard time if I spend the whole time thinking, really thinking, as long as I get there, because I do feel better after, even just, I think, for assuming that position for 15, 20 minutes. I mean, maybe I make the half hour, maybe I don't. So, Linz, any recollection of your first week, just the Advaita Vedanta kind of experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like there's so much there with that. And I mean, as Karen can say, I over intellectualized a lot of my first part of my path was just reading, consuming. And so when I got to these, I definitely had a lot of mental friction, especially because all of my background was Buddhism at that point. And it really threw me for a loop. My concepts like really like, and I was on retreat, with these. So it was a really incredible experience, but it didn't fit with my mental concepts and it really rocked my world. So like, I just am so envious of like the position of what Robin is saying, that it is so different. And then to what Jeff was saying, as far as like looking behind the curtain, I think that these practices specifically really helped with my concept of like, I thought one day like the curtain's gonna just go away. You know what I mean? That one day there's no curtain and I'm gonna be in that space forever. But I think with these practices specifically, I was like, oh no, you just get more familiar with what's behind the curtain. You know what I mean? And one week it's you're sitting back there and things are cool, but then sometimes it closes. But I think these really helps me drop the expectation of the curtain disappearing, and that it's just more familiarizing yourself with that space and kind of creating that habit over anything else. Yeah, it's so beautiful to hear you guys talk about it. I'm just like overwhelmed with the experience that these are. I don't know how much you want from me, but
As much as you want to say.
But I've been hesitant to kind of come back to these after the Kriya, just because of that experience, to be honest.
Right. So the Kriya, Robin, we did a 300-hour and both Jeff and Lindsay were in it, and we did these meditations. And at some point you're welcome, and they're on the website, they're free, but and it's just a balancing breathing meditation. And it just makes you feel very balanced. And, there's no downside. And, the potential downside of these meditations, first of all, is this kind of pushing to sort of seeing behind the curtain. Even this idea, Robin's like, did I have to see behind the curtain? Right. Because, maybe you do, maybe you don't. It's not really like, what these meditations can do is just kind of take the edge off, right? The edge of being so identified as being us, which is a lot of the time not a problem at all. And then every once in a while, you just are banging your head against the wall, being so, conditioned, being so trained to be how we are in daily life, that it's nice to sometimes take a step, and whether it's behind the curtain or I just like to think of a backward step. And that's the Zen term for something that's similar to this. So you take the backward step and you get a wider view. You're not quite, it's kind of like you're engaged in a difficult conversation with somebody, and you just you can't get them to say what you want, and you can't figure out how to say what you want in a way that they can hear it. And you're just so in it. And then you take a step back and take a deep breath and see the whole landscape and see the bigger picture. And maybe a good idea comes to you. And either way, you don't say the thing that would have gotten them super pissed off or triggered. It's like, to me, that's, you read books and you think, oh, yes, the veil will go away forever, and I will always and forever never see myself as separate, and I will love everyone equally all the time, and I'll never say anything inappropriate, and the rest of my life is going to be bliss. And books read that way, and I think that that's ridiculous. I've been conditioned for 50 years in one way, and I've been working on this stuff for another, 15 or something. And it can really, really help, especially if we don't have the idea that we're going to become somebody else, and that's either attainable. But, if you're going to write a best-selling book, you need to say something like that. And I'm not dissing Adyashanti or Eckhart Tolle or anybody. But I think that they're so excited about the positives that they're not always really talking you through. I've read everything I think that Adyashanti's written, and at some point he's very clear on the struggles that he experienced over the 20 years or so of the first 20 years or so of insane amounts of practice. There was a lot of struggle and a lot of pain, and it's not, what we're doing is very slowly, very gently, sort of, it's like cleaning the glasses lenses, seeing things a little more clearly, but not becoming something else. That being said, these meditations are asking you to identify as awareness. And I don't know, what do you think about that? Does that work?
As we're kind of talking about like the negatives, yeah, I think that's kind of what I was getting at. With the step back, I was having a hard time engaging in the world on like the everyday basis. And I guess now as we're talking about it, I can see what an important experience that was for me, because it helped me stop chasing that experience. Because it was like, it is a bit difficult, without a lot of practice. But yeah, that it was difficult to be a little bit step back, and then, serving coffees every day. So that there is, I guess, fear around some of that.
So that was the perfect segue I needed. So this is why we don't only do the practices that we did over the last week. And this is why we then want to do the practices we're going to do over the next 2 weeks. And I purposely weighted them when I made the course 1 week to 2 weeks and not like evenly, because I think it is important to do a little disengaging, just like sitting down on, over in a mindfulness practice and watching your breath for 10 minutes to stop, to get out of a tricky, sticky thought pattern, or going to a yoga class and forgetting the thing that you've been obsessing about for 2 days or something. That's what that's for, is to disengage. But we don't want to just disengage. And there are entire schools of people who I think just disengage, and then they never get to the next step for whatever reason. But we are going to move right into the next step, which is how to re-engage. The idea is to become more loving, more connected. So we do the first, so the best way to explain this process of what we did last week and then what we'll do over the next 2 weeks is explained by Richard Freeman. And he explains it like making pancakes. Okay, so you pour the pancake batter into the pan. And the first thing that has to happen is the bottom of the pancake has to separate from the pan. So you cook it the right amount of time. That's what we did last week, is you cook it the right amount of time for the pancake batter to separate from the bottom of the pan. If you try to flip it too early, it's a mess. If you go to flip it too late, it's burnt. And that's the doing only these practices. If you flip it just at the right time, which hopefully is this weekend, then you cook the second side of the pancake, which is the re-engaging side. So we need both. We need to do a little bit of disengaging so that we can re-engage differently, so that we can try out a different way of feeling, essentially. And this idea of awakening, it's not like necessary to do these kinds of practices. They are my background. This is what I did first, not these, but something close enough. So yeah, it's where I sort of come from on the yoga and meditation path, but so I like it. But realistically, just doing mindfulness, heart practices, you can totally get more engaged in your life. These are like a fast track technique, and yet ultimately they may or may not be something you end up liking. But either way, it is planting seeds and exposure to a sort of different way of practice. So, but what I want these practices to point to, especially what happens over the next 2 weeks, is that the idea is to show that these awakening experiences or concepts or truths are natural. That they're not esoteric, they're not weird, they're not out there, they're not for the 0.005% of monks who've been training for 25 years. It was so funny. Chris had too much to drink the other night, and he gets philosophical when he does that. And we were watching a movie, and he was going off about, how how could it be helpful that like Buddhism and Nirvana, I forget the movie provoked this in some way, is only available to like people who have been practicing, you know, grew up in a monastery, they've been practicing their entire lives, and this could like happen to them at age 50 or something. And I was like, that's actually not the teaching. That's also not the right time to talk to him about it, but you know, but my understanding of these teachings is that more and more people like us, normal people with jobs and houses and relationships, are open to these experiences, are having these experiences, these understandings, and that they're not weird and they're not esoteric. And I mean, I had these experiences in my very first month of practicing meditation, my third week. I mean, I will never forget the day when like my whole being changed in my third week of practice in my entire life. So, you know, and that to me means, you know, I don't know the reason. There's a reason all these teachings have been made public, you know, that were not available 20 years ago and were not available when I started online. Couldn't find them. And everyone's decided to make them public because they think people are ready. I don't know why, but I think these teachings are accessible, available, and that anyone who wants to do them can have these understandings, and that it's not weird and it's not, and you don't need to be a, you know, a monk. And I think that's amazing and fun. So any other thoughts about this before we do some breathing and some practice? But basically the practices we're going into just sort of describe what it's like to feel awake, and then to show you that you're already feeling it. And that yeah, the felt sense is love, and we'll get to specific kind of love practices. And the felt sense is not being trapped in your body, but being located in your body, because we all know that's helpful from a mindfulness standpoint, but also being expansive and sort of feeling like connected to the people around you, to the space around you, and to show that you already are, but that you have ideas otherwise that you've been taught, and you haven't been taught those sort of wrongly. I mean, imagine trying to go through life having never been taught, okay, these are your toys and those are someone else's toys, right? Like that had to happen so that you didn't, you know, make another kid upset by taking their toys home. So there was nothing wrong with all of that. This is sort of an enhancement of the actual. So, you know, in the Maslow's hierarchy, we want to kind of work through being an actualized human being, adult, like who's kind and generous. And so, you know, this is an enhancement from there to then also become even more interconnected is the idea. And that's it. So just very basic evolution and growth, you know, and then the pitfalls as Lindsay described, and the reason the next 2 weeks are so important is that there can be a sense of nihilism. So there are a lot of folks who are taught what we did over the last week, then feel like the world is a dream and nothing matters. So that's what these 2 weeks are to counteract. That's a massive misunderstanding and was never the point. And yet, you know, you can understand how that misunderstanding could be taken on, right? Like, well, you know, I'm not really this body or this mind, and I'm this awareness, and it's over there, you know, and Karen's off doing these things, but I'm back here, you know, and that we do want to disengage a little to kind of be able to shift patterns, but not so much that then we're like observing our life. Because that wouldn't be any fun. So we'll do our ninefold breathing to clear out the side channels in the center. And then I'm going to introduce you to a double breath technique that's designed even more than the one we did last week to bring energy into the central channel, just to help complement, to create the physiology to really feel the connectedness and the spaciousness and the calm, you know, and similar to what we've done all along, do it gently. Don't try too hard. If you don't like them, don't do them. And again, I'll talk you through a couple before the practice, but we'll intersperse them during the practice because that's when these are normally done. And this is from a technique called Tumo, which is that inner heat stuff that if you ever watch the movies about the Tibetan yogis and they're up in these caves and there's snow everywhere and they put wet sheets around them and heat them. I don't know why you would do that, first of all. First of all, I was taught that if it's at the surface, the heat, and we're not going to do enough to create a bunch of heat in you. We're underdoing this stuff. This is just like a, teeny suggestion. They're doing massive visualizations. They're doing like an ongoing, it's a whole sadhana. We are doing like we're like taking, one feather out of a, whole bird. But first of all, you don't want the heat on the skin. So that's a really weird test of heat. I mean, you can make it go there, but like I was always taught that was a sign that it had gone wrong. Not wrong, but wasn't perfect. And the heat's not the point. But anyway, it is a kind of cult thing. So this is from that, but again, that is a whole big thing. And this is something small. All right, so we'll start out with the simple clearing of the 3 channels. So right thumb to the base of the right 4th finger. And when you're ready, we're going to close the right nostril. We're going to inhale slowly through the left. Down the left side of the body, we pause a little at the junction, switch sides with the 4th finger, and exhale up the right side and out the right nostril. And we do it again, just with your own timing. Close the right, inhale left, trace the path of the breath to the junction, hold lightly, change sides, up the right and out the right nostril, clearing the right nostril. And then one more time, close the right, inhale left, pause and switch the 4th finger. Exhale right, clearing the right side. And then we relax and notice the felt sense of the clearing of the right side. And then thumb to base of 4th finger on the left hand. We close the left nostril. We inhale right to the base of the spine. Hold the breath lightly while you switch sides. And we exhale up the left side, and it's a little more forceful at the end. Inhale right. Hold at the junction, change sides when you're ready. Exhale left again. We're clearing out the left side, a little more forceful at the end. And one more time, inhale right. And exhale left. And then we relax. Now feeling a sense of openness in both sides. Spaciousness. And then we're going to clear the central channel. So we don't need hands for this. We're going to inhale through both nostrils, back behind the eyes, down both sides, hold lightly at the junction. Then we exhale up the midline, gently at first, a little more forceful at the end, and it exhales out the crown, clearing the center. And then again, we'll inhale through the sides, hold lightly at the junction, just briefly, and then exhale gently at first, more forceful at the end, but still, not too firmly. And then one more time, inhale through both sides, pause at the junction, exhale up the center, a little more forceful at the end. And then we rest with the sense of all 3 channels more open, more clear, creating a sense of stability, openness, clarity, balance. And then probably we'll do 2 of these, just really gently, the double breath. And then I'll give you options to do them during the meditation. So I'm going to have you inhale gently into the center of the chest. And then we're going to re-inhale, which means add more air into the center of the chest. And then I'd like you to swallow, and that opens the throat center. One more time, I've taken too long to say this, but one more time, a little inhale into the center of the chest. And now exhale about 1/5 of the way, you don't have to be precise. And then inhale very deeply. The attention, the breath comes to the plane of the navel. We press the diaphragm down, pull the pelvic floor up, squeeze lightly. And then we release the pressure and we exhale up the midline, just like you just did, clearing the central channel, a little more forceful at the end. And if it makes you warm, that's totally natural. And the next one I won't take so long. I was very casual about that while you're holding your breath. So one more time, inhale gently into the center of the chest. Re-inhale a little more air. Swallow. Attention at the center of the chest while you're holding. Exhale about 1/5. And then deeply inhale into the navel. Squeezing diaphragm, plane of the diaphragm down, pelvic floor up, squeezing at the plane of the navel. You only hold as long as it feels good. And then exhaling up the midline, gently at first and maybe a little more forcefully at the end. And then you just sort of rest. It may create a sense of spaciousness, a steadiness of mind. Made me warm just to talk about it, so it may make you warm too. And we'll go right into the meditation and I'll talk you through that a couple of times during. And if you end up liking this meditation, it's number 8 from the recordings. Be like an open window. The emptiness of this space is what allows the view to be seen. Be the open, empty space of awareness, which allows all experience to be known. Allow the natural flow of thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions. Know and feel that you're not defined by or limited by any of these passing experiences. Be the awareness that knows the flow of experience. Know that you can't be other than that. Thought imagines that a separate I stands apart from experience, witnessing it from a distance. Most of the thoughts, feelings, activities, and relationships that follow arise on behalf of this imagined self. The separate I is always negotiating experience, trying to get what it needs for survival or pleasure, and get rid of what it views as unpleasant or a threat. And so the self is always in more or less subtle conflict with the rest of the world. The separate self is made of the thought that I am located in and limited to this body-mind. The experience of unhappiness is the signal that we've made this mistake. Suffering is to the mind what pain is to the body, a signal that something needs attention. It isn't a punishment, it's a wake-up call. The separate self isn't an entity, it's an activity of thinking and feeling. This is our simple experience. To become aware of this is called realization or awakening. Now, if you'd like, we'll inhale together gently into the center of the chest. And then inhale a little bit more breath into the heart center and swallow to open the throat center. Holding the breath at the heart, light concentration. Then we'll exhale about a fifth of the breath. And then deep inhale into the belly, pressing the plane of the navel down, pulling the plane of the pelvic floor up so they kind of squeeze a bit at the navel, only as long as you like. And then we release the squeezing. Imagine the release of the breath up the midline and out the crown. And you kind of rest in the freshness of the sensation. And then if you like, one more time, remember it's optional. Inhale into the center of the chest. Re-inhale a little more air into the center. Swallow. We're holding at the center of the chest. We exhale about a fifth. Big inhale into the navel. Hold the breath there, the mind there, squeezing plane of the navel down, pulling plane of the pelvic floor up. Squeeze together lightly. Hold as long there as you like. And when it's time for you to naturally release the pressure, exhaling up the midline and out the crown. Do we expect an extraordinary event called awakening to take place in the future? Realization isn't an event. To expect awakening to happen is like watching a movie and hoping the screen will all of a sudden appear. We're looking for an amazing event to take place in the movie that will finally reveal the screen. If we look for awakening in the future, we are, whether we realize it or not, rejecting the current situation as inadequate and projecting something better in the future. The search is a subtle rejection of now. And the resistance to what is makes the peace and happiness we're seeking unavailable. The imaginary separate self is made of this resistance. It's the activity of resisting and seeking. Thought is always on a journey into the past or future, but I, pure awareness, never takes the journey with it. Don't try to get rid of resisting thoughts. This is another way the separate self perpetuates. Simply be the knowing of whatever's known. Then discover, gradually or suddenly, that pure knowing doesn't share the limits or destiny of what we know. Again, if you'd like, you could inhale into the center of the chest. Re-inhale a little more air. Swallow. Exhale about a fifth. Big inhale into the navel. Hold the breath, hold the mind, plane of the navel down, pelvic floor plane up, squeeze. Release, exhaling up the midline, a little more forceful at the end. And then if you'd like, we'll do one more. Inhale to center of chest. Re-inhale, a little more air. Swallow. Exhale about a fifth. Big inhale into the navel. Plane of the navel presses down. Plane of the pelvic floor pulls up. Little squeeze. Release. Exhale up and out the midline. This simple knowing of our being has been mistaken for a special experience. It's true that the recognition can trigger a deep relaxation in the body and mind, which can feel wonderful for some time. This is a temporary side effect. The side effect itself is usually mistaken for awakening, but awakening doesn't appear in the mind. The revelation of our true nature is a timeless, transparent recognition that can take place so quietly that it isn't even noticed by the mind initially. The effect on the body-mind may not be immediate, and it may not be spectacular. In most cases, it takes place gradually over many years. The more dramatic effects of recognition make for great stories, and these are the ones we hear. Hearing these stories and not having had a dramatic experience, we think something is still missing. But special effects aren't awakening, and they may or may not happen. I never am, become, or know anything other than my own ever-present and unlimited being. The simple knowing of this is awakening, and the experience is one of peace and happiness. This understanding was historically intertwined with Eastern cultures, so it may seem exotic. But it's the most simple and obvious understanding. We don't suddenly become unlimited or ever present. We just realize that we've been hypnotized by the attitudes of our culture into believing that we share the limits and destiny of the body-mind. This simple recognition profoundly changes how we think and in time how we feel about ourselves. It doesn't stop thoughts, feelings, and sensations from appearing, but we stop identifying with them. There can be old momentum, and thoughts and feelings of a separate self may continue to appear out of habit. But without the fuel of belief, they begin to slow down and eventually drop away. In time, the new understanding begins to pervade all realms of life, how we think and feel, how we perceive the world, how we sense the body, and how we relate to others. It transforms experience from the inside out. Awakening is just a halfway stage. There's a never-ending process that follows. It goes on, deepening forever as we live a life consistent with our understanding. Abide freely as the knowing awareness that you always and already are. And then let's take the palms together in front of the heart. And we'll bow. Maybe considering all the people who came before us. I mean, these are very traditional teachings. I mean, presented in a modern way, but long lineage of passing this down. And here we are on Zoom at home. 2022, talking about it. Sort of interesting. All right, so I will write up the homework. I did leave, there is a third inhale, and I just thought, given the time, it's also harder not, with you all muted, I can't like see and hear like how it's going with you with the breathing. So I'll put that third re-inhale, or second re-inhale in the notes, but it doesn't matter really. Before presenting this to you, it had been a while since I'd done it. I just decided to Google, like do two more double breaths out there. And let me tell you, there are so many ways that it's done on the internet. And I even found some notes from my teacher back in the day that are different from the ones that I had been doing so anyway, really, you don't have to worry about it being like slightly off, because it's just a sort of general direction. And of course, if you don't like the pranayama, or don't need it or don't want it, you just don't do it. No problem at all.
Just as a side note, I mean, pranayamas, I either love them or hate them. And that one I really like. I feel like it doesn't affect me negatively. So
Awesome.
some do. Some I feel like, but that I like that one.
Great. So feel free to intersperse that through the practice. Don't do a ton at the end, because you do want to kind of release it, but Linz, were you going to say something?
I'm sorry if you covered this in the first 2 weeks, and if you guys have to pop off, but when you talk about the two, like it's Advaita Vedanta and something else, right?
Kashmir Shaivism,
okay,
is the tradition that we're using for the second half, but really any non-dual, because we're using practices from there. But
yeah.
It's the same general conceptual framework as any non-dual tradition, including Tibetan Buddhism, and including even like the Ajahn Chah lineage of the Thai forest, Theravadan Buddhists are non-dual too, pretty much. So it's not really limited to one school.
How did Rupert pull these together? Like, they were taught separately, and Rupert specifically pulled them together so that it was more integrated.
Yes, although he doesn't teach, like we are, he teaches the one and then he teaches the other. He doesn't sort of mingle them in one session.
Right.
But he explicitly teaches from both schools, and that's his, and I'm taking that from him. That's
okay.
Do other people do that? I don't know. There's not a lot of yoga meditation out there. There really isn't. The Buddhists have like everything's written down. Everything's like, very specific about how to meditate. The yogis, I'm sure if you're in, living in an ashram with someone, they're teaching you this stuff. But my understanding is that in the yoga tradition, it's really handed down teacher to student, and it's not sort of written down or widely accessible. My yoga teacher happened to like Tibetan Buddhism and Zen Buddhism. So we did Buddhist meditation with Richard, not yogic meditation. I'm sure he's, knew all this stuff, but yeah, it's harder to know what's out there in the yoga schools because even the texts are like poetry. They're not, they're not like you do this and then you do that. They're describing experiences from the poetic side. So it's hard to know really what's out there in the yoga traditions. And Rupert Spira is one of the few modern people who actually lays it out. And so interesting, potter. He makes ceramic pots by trade. So he's an artist. So it's so interesting that he's so sort of clear intellectually, not that you can't, have lots of skills, but like, he's not, a professor or, like a lot of these Tibetan teachers end up, you need to do something to make a living, right? So even these great teachers all mostly have some kind of other job. And he's not a PhD professor, he's a potter. So it's just sort of, which I love actually.
Is the Advaita Vedanta and the Kashmir Shaivism, is that both yogic tradition?
They're both yogic traditions, but they are not like related to each other really.
Yeah. Okay.
So Advaita Vedanta, you think of Ramana Maharshi.
Yeah.
That kind of school. Kashmir Shaivism, I don't know anybody other than like Rupert. I don't know where, but it's a non-dual school and it really fits in with all of the other non-dual teachings. So I wasn't trained in this. I was trained in non-dual teachings of Tibetan Buddhism, but these were the most accessible teachings I have found. And I've been looking for 15 years for something more accessible because the way I was trained in Tibetan Buddhism was esoteric. And it's so I don't do it and I wouldn't teach it because I'm not, really a formal Tibetan Buddhist, and it would just be weird. And there's just a lot of stuff overlaid and it gets your mind. What's great about all the detailed ritual and practices is it really gets you into it because you're doing so many things that you just let go. But it wouldn't be appropriate for me to teach that stuff. Whereas this, Rupert calls it the direct path. And he doesn't do a week of concentration before. He doesn't do any concentration. He just teaches this right off the bat. How does it work? I don't know. I haven't been to his retreats. I mean, I've heard people ask questions. Sounds like a mixed bag of, this stuff's out there. But what I want, you guys to take out of it is that even though the teachings are a bit out there, that the impact can be very concrete. So that, what does it mean that I'm awareness and I'm not my thoughts and feelings? It means that when I get totally out there and I'm freaked out and I'm pissed off and I think so-and-so needs to be this way, my partner needs to be this way and they're not, my mom needs to be this way and they're not, that I can maybe take a backward step in that moment and say, why do they have to be the way I want them to be? I'm just conditioned to want them that way. I'm just awareness for a moment. I'm just going to know, I'm going to relax. And then what we're going to learn over the next 2 weeks is like to feel connected, to feel like I'm not just trapped in my body. I am the trees and the snow and the sunlight, and I'm you guys, and I'm this room, and I'm the dogs. And that can help me be more compassionate and feel less separate and actually feel more happy, because separation is a big part of feeling unhappy. So that even if you're alone and you're for a walk in the woods, like I'm here with the trees, like we're here together. Why do we separate the tree out from the forest? Why can't we just look out and see a whole landscape as one thing? And then to insert ourselves in the landscape and feel like we're connected to our environment. And then, to have more compassion for someone in front of us who's, maybe behaving badly because they're suffering in some way, instead of jumping to our own defense. Maybe we're a little softer and we think, wow, they're really hurting and they probably don't really want to be a jerk to me right now. And I wonder what's going on for them. And I bet they're really stressed about this. And I wonder how I can be there for them, even while they're being like obnoxious. And I'm not saying to become, I never want anyone to be a doormat or not stand up for your own, peace or happiness. But that often in those moments, a compassionate word can defuse something, whereas a defensive word will just make things worse. That's all. That's all it's really meant to do. And it's not about the philosophy. And, some of us are philosophy geeks, and Linz and I, love to do all the reading and taking in the ideas, but really those can get you pretty far. The problem about reading about the ideas is it sends you off in some direction of how you understand the ideas where you are now. And maybe that has nothing to do with what the teachings are pointing to, and that happens all the time. So what I love where Robin is, where she's like not looking for anything specific. I'll try it and maybe I'll sleep better. And that's great. There's no need to go off on the philosophical tangent, even though it's natural, and I took out 2/3, 3/4 of the philosophy, by the way, from these. There's a reason I don't have you just listening to Rupert's stuff. First of all, it's kind of not organized and brief. And second of all, he's very specific about, the nature of consciousness in ways that I think are hard to prove. And then it gets into that, like that's a distraction. Whereas I'm not interested in sort of what you think so much as how you feel. And hopefully this helps you feel, through planting these seeds, more connected, less sort of stuck. And that's really my goal. So homework, I will send Adyashanti an article on enlightenment, but Jeff's already read it and it may not be the right thing for Robin, but I'll send it anyway. And I'd like you to do, and of course it doesn't matter like if you get to all of them, right? But meditations number 7 that we skipped, and then 9 through 13. So that's 6 meditations. And that's it. And then we'll chat about those and we'll do the last ones. And then when we wrap up the last week, we'll do something like quite different to kind of bring it back to the heart. So. Anything else? Sorry about the dogs. It's 9 to 10 is apparently dog rowdy time, but thank you. Have a great week.
Thanks, guys. Have a good week.